Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My great pleasure to be here on this beautiful ship where I come now and then again when I'm not working for other pirates. But my name is Richard Heyman again. I'm a professional mariner and I've been in ship operations around the world. And I've come and gone all around Africa, circumnavigated the entire vast continent. But I've never sailed on the sands, which is probably offered now. And they have sort of surfboards with sails, and you can have all the pleasure of sailing, but you just stay a little drier, I suppose. But anyway, I'm going to show you about Namibia, which is our stop for the next couple of days. And this is a remarkable place. But before I say that, I would like to say I'm here with my wife, Barbara, who may be somewhere there. And we're happy to get to meet you and have a meal or a drink. There she is, Barbara, somewhere's in the audience. But my professional rule is only have one drink at a time. So, but coming to Africa is really a great experience. I'm sure many of you have been to many places, but this is sort of like the vastest continent other than the general Eurasia. So it has so many surprises, so much different lands, so many different cultures, so many different people and languages, that it's just like a great wealth of experience to be had. Even if you've come many times, there's always more to see. And Namibia is one of the more obscure destinations which seasoned travelers do come to. The old saying, if you're truly a traveler, you've gone to Cape Town and Singapore, and oh yes, Venice. But the real travelers go to Namibia. So here we go. This is a relatively new nation after years of conflict, but now it's at peace and full of many more possibilities to go travel and experience things there. The name itself, Namib, is actually a Hotero word which means the vast land, because this is truly a vast place. Well, just Africa is so vast. Of course, Namibia is right down on this arid coast down here, the world's driest desert. I'll show in a later talk that Africa is so big that all of the continents of North, South America, and all of Europe would fit comfortably in the landmass of Africa. So when you say, we'll go visit Africa, it means, well, there's so much in so many places, you don't have enough time in your life to visit everywhere. But we're starting. And we're coming up now from Cape Town to this very dry coast, which has been famously dangerous for sailors because there's a little stretch of a few rivers and a bit of green. It's not as green as this illustration, but right off the coast is very mountainous. So it's a very inaccessible place until recently when they've come in with, they used to build railroads for mines and roads up there. Now you can actually cross Africa by coach or by train. So the travel is a lot easier, but this coast for navigators confounded, first of all, the Portuguese came down because they'd be going against what's called the Beluga current, which runs up the coast, sort of like the currents in South America that run cold currents up the west coast of South America. The same thing happens in Africa. And then if you get wind against the current and the elements, you get a very rough coast, which was one of the areas of the world where navigators are told just stay away because it's what they call a ship-killing coast. And up in the northern region, there are just endless shipwrecks from the days where people were not sure where they were going. Well, now the nation borders with South Africa and, of course, Botswana, inland, and Angola. And there's been a lot of conflict in the whole area, but the country is now, let's say, unified in its own way. South Africa held Wallis Bay and the Penguin Islands until 1994. The country got its independence in 1974, so it's a fairly new country. And we'll be going to Lüderitz, the old German town, and then to Wallis Bay and Swakopmund. Can we all say that together? Swakopmund. So if you get lost, just ask for that. And then other people take trips up into the interior, and there's remarkable mountain landscapes. There's lush, small oases. This Okavango at the northern part has a unique quality of There are rivers flowing from the highlands, but they go into the valley and the water never goes to the sea. It just fills up in the rainy season. Vast basin which has a lot of wildlife and is now open for visitors with lodges and places to go visit. But a lot of the land is so dry that it is unbelievable that any vegetation or any animals can actually live there. So there are pangolins, and then our favorite wild dogs. Don't get near them. Don't pet one of these guys. They're always hungry. And then I saw the first time I've seen an excursion to go see the wild horses north of Wallis Bay. And this is one of the, let's say, leftover population of when horses were the way to get around, and some of them escaped. And you may know there are similar wild horse populations in Assateague Island in eastern Maryland, or Sable Island in the Nova Scotia. So these are the happiest horses on earth because they never heard of a saddle. And then others that try to blend in with the environment. Now, where did the zebra get its spots? You have to ask the Kipling on that one. And then there are desert elephants. I mean, elephants are remarkable that they can live in a desert because they have to eat so much and have so much water for the great mass that they concentrate around water holes. And I believe we'll have some more detailed explanations on the ship, but particularly when you go and see the wildlife, you'll have the locals who know the best. And these are the antelope or springbok. And so as you go into the interior of Namibia, you're reaching near the Kalahari Desert in the south and eventually the Serengeti in the east. And so this is where the interior of Africa is still relatively wild, though it has all the problems of poaching and habitat loss and conflict with agriculture, and that's sort of the constant problem of much of the area. And another charming animal, we'll get to see some of them later in our trip, we hope. There are not that many in Namibia because the water is so limited to a few places. And then there's one of the big five, the great wildebeest and other oxen and the rhinoceros. So you'll get to see, hopefully, the big five and other wildlife as we go off into the land. And then, of course, the cheetah, the world's fastest runner a leopard, sorry, it's a leopard. There it is. See, my first correction, thank you very much. By the way, there's a wonderful movie made in South Africa called Duna about the young cheetah that is orphaned and raised by a boy, and it may be on the television here, but it's a very charming local story from the wildlife here. But the people of Namibia have been, many of them, coming from other parts of Africa, particularly the Herero people, who were Bantu-speaking people who came with their cattle from Botswana, Uganda, that area, over into Namibia, following rains and spreading their population into these oases out in the desert. And then there are also the San people who were mostly in the Kalahari and are still in that part of western South Africa. And these people are all cattle raisers of the different varieties. So the whole culture is based around owning cattle, raising the cattle, trading them. And so this was a culture that when the Europeans came in and brought other cattle and other livestock, this spread diseases and caused some of the upheaval and trouble of the last century, because the indigenous cattle died off a great deal and then they were bred with other strains, and so nowadays it's sort of stabilized, but there was constant conflict over the cattle in Namibia like in other places. Well, this is one of the musical instruments made out of the horns of one of the variety. And but these were the people, the Herero, who lived in central and north central Namibia and had that cattle culture, but they came into conflict with the German colonists who set up ranches. They fenced off areas to keep the wild cattle away from the European-style cattle. And so this led to the battles of the peoples of Namibia in the last century, particularly the Namu people and the Herero conflicted over land, the Ovango, other Bantu people in central South Namibia actually fought amongst themselves, and when the Europeans came, first the Portuguese and then the Germans and the British South Africans. This ended up in terrible conflicts, but these people remain, and they have this distinctive hair wrapping in a hat, which is still worn these days. You'll see them, and it's sort of a fashion that occasionally gets replicated. I saw at the airport the other day someone who wore their sleep pillow on their head. It looked just like this. So there's a tip. If you want to take a nap anywhere, wear a pillow for a hat. But these are very proud and colorful people. And even though they had conflict in the past, now they are one of the dozen or more indigenous people of Namibia. There's some Portuguese, there's some German, and many more South African peoples that live in the towns in particular and out in the ranch areas. But these are the indigenous people of Namibia. And this is actually San people who are also called the Bushmen, and they live in the Kalahari Desert. And here's some of the Himba, smaller groups that are out in the further outback in the bush of Namibia. Again, the variety of people is quite fantastic, and also the variety of language. South Africa, for instance, has 11 official languages. And in Namibia, because they had so many other small groups and languages, they decided that English would be the national language and teach that in school, because everybody will go back and speak a different language at home, and this is typical of much of Africa. But it's a sparsely populated country. There are only 2 million, maybe 2.5 million in the whole vast area. And the country is bigger than Venezuela, so it's not a small place. But it's the least populated country of Africa. And when you go to other places that are very crowded, particularly West Africa, it's quite a contrast. So there's a lot of room for small groups to live in subsistence farming and cattle raising. And so these people still exist way out in the farther reaches of the country. We will be going to the ports and the towns, which are not very big to begin with, but not far away is this kind of traditional life in the outbacks. But when the Europeans first came here, as I said, the coast and the navigation was marked by the Portuguese. This is what's called potada, a marker to claim the land for, in this case, King João of Portugal. And of course, the Portuguese continued around to Cape Town, and the Cape Hope continued all the way up the east coast to India finally, and created their trading posts, but they never had many colonists, and they were never, let's say, conquered the interior. But back a couple of hundred years ago, this map is about 1600, this whole vast area was sort of an unknown, and the coast was known, and this is now Namibia up here down to Cape Town, but the interior was an unknown imperium, as it says, and many other peoples and kingdoms would come and go over the time before even the European colonization came. Then in 1884, there was the infamous Berlin Conference, which parceled out all of Africa to European colonies, and Germany claimed Southwest Africa here, along with in East Africa, Kenya and other parts, but and of course the British claimed the West Cape and up into Uganda and all the way up to Egypt. So this was a turning point in history for many of the local peoples, because they were suddenly under whatever king or governor that just came marching in by the force of arms. But the German Empire under Kaiser Wilhelm, and actually Bismarck himself personally said, we have to have our part of Africa too, in the Great Scramble. And so they came and landed at Wallis Bay, 1884. This is the name Wallis actually is whale in German. Well, this is a very sheltered harbor, one of few along the whole coast. And so then they set up under a governor and a military camp there to claim. And their reason was they didn't want the British to take all the way up the coast and kind of unify all of Africa, mostly under British rule in this area. Of course, the French were in West Africa, and the Italians took Somaliland, and this whole period was once of rampant imperialism, let's say. And the German governors tried to make peace among the local people who were constantly fighting each other And cattle rustling was the greatest crime of all. And so they had, let's say, decades of conflict. And the German Governor General Lothar von Trotha was sent from Berlin to make peace in Namibia. And so then they would play one group off of another and then have campaigns to try to pacify the countryside, where the people were either nomadic or else they were so far away they didn't know where they could find them in the vastness of the country. But there was a leader called Mahero of the Herero people who organized his own forces, got rifles and horses, and attacked the German garrisons. In one initial battle, they killed over 100 German soldiers. But in the Herero tradition, they accused them of cattle rustling, which meant they were not only killed, but they were mutilated. And this went back to Europe and Germany, and this shocked the nation that Africans would attack and kill Europeans. And so that unleashed a decade of terrible war where the Herero and then also the Namu people, this is the leader of the Namu Vitboy, they had a kind of a guerrilla warfare and a resistance against the, let's say, well-organized, well-armed German troops. But this led to, unfortunately, an incursion into most of the native areas of Namibia and a couple of decisive battles, this one in Waterberg in 1904, where the Herero people, who were the main resistance, were driven to lost militarily. They had no cannon or anything like that, and the Herero people were driven into the desert, and the wells were poisoned, so that when they found water at an oasis, that killed them from poisoning. And so there's it said maybe 80% of the people, over 100,000, died either in conflict or in starvation and dehydration just out in the desert. So this was one of the cruel events of the time, and hundreds of German soldiers also died there. Then they rounded up the remaining population and put them in concentration camps. And so this is the grim history of the country, is that it was a sort of a sample of how you could have ethnic cleansing, concentration camps, planned executions and such. And so this has been written a lot about, and the German government has, in its good faith, recognized the history and paid some, through foreign aid, some billion euros to the country of Namibia to help it develop in the last decades. But at that time, over 100 years ago, they created indigenous areas, which are often the very poorest places. The good ranching is down in the south in the central area near Wallis Bay, and where we're going to go at Ludovitz mining centers. They were cleansed of any indigenous people, and they were put in these areas where they had a hard time surviving. This is the infamous Shark Island in Wallis Bay, where medical experiments were done on living prisoners. So this has been called the first trial run for the later genocides. And so this was in the news and published in the scandal of its time, but it was one of many conflicts and troubles around Africa. So you had the Portuguese in Angola, the Republic of South Africa, finally, Rhodesia, Mozambique, and the ship will continue on up there. But every country had its own, let's say, development before, during, and after the colonial era. But in Namibia, there was continued resistance as part of the 1960s and 70s to make all these countries independent. And so the SWAPO Party, which was the Southwest African People's Organization, led a guerrilla campaign against the South Africans, who were had rule over Namibia at this time. So there was, again, fighting. This was at the same time there was a terrible war in Angola. So the whole history of the area just recently is still in conflict that has mostly been resolved and agreed now, and Namibia is very proudly independent. So their leader at the time, who was a guerrilla fighter, became the president. He just recently died, but they still have a parliamentary democracy. They have no king, they have councils, and they respect the rights of their various people. And this is the leader who just died, and he was put in power through elections. They've managed to maintain a democracy, which is not true in many other African countries. But they're very proud people, and they had a good economy for how few people there are, mainly mining and now tourism. Well, this is the former President Nujoma, who just passed away at the age of 94. So he's one of the last generation that led his nation to independence and then had a peaceful succession of a new elected president. And here he is meeting de Klerk in South Africa at the announcement of the freedom of the country of Namibia. So the symbol of the country has a springbok on it, the great antelope. And so this is what we'll see, that they are small but a proud nation, and especially the modern conflict of rugby and football and all that kind of stuff. That fortunately that's replaced all the troubles of the past. But you still get a kind of a mix of cultures here. So you get Afrikaan, a little German, and these are just the written languages. Then there's many spoken languages. But we'll be going, after Ludwitz, we'll be going up to Wallis Bay, which is the largest town along the shore. And you can see it sort of spreads from the docks up into the desert. And then further north of here is the Skeleton Coast. But these are pretty crowded towns. Poor people come in and try to have work. Here's the symbol of Wallis Bay. It used to be a whaling center, and up the coast there are skeletons of the slaughter of the whales along this coast in previous times. Now there's a lot of oil production, particularly as you go up near Angola. And then you have this long stretch coast with some of the strongest winds sustained along the shore. And so this is the site of the world's fastest sailboat races. These are hydrofoil boats that will go 90 kilometers an hour. I mean, they're just flying on the water. So this is in Wallis Bay. And then first we'll be going to Ludwitz, which is the town, again, crowded on the harbor, and then a small town. But this is famous for its architecture. And the town nearby up the shore, Svakopmund. Anybody know how to say that? But this was a German settlement, so the town is famous for its, let's say, Rheingebau style of architecture. Little symbol of the town, again, fishing and diamonds. This was built to access the diamond mines inland. And there's an excursion to one of the abandoned ghost towns all of tomorrow to go see how this was a boom industry that suddenly they dug it out or it got replaced by bigger mines in South Africa. But there's a walking tour of the town through the now preserved historic UNESCO site of Ludwitz with this beautiful German architecture and certain houses like the Gorka House, which is a museum and you can walk through. It has a lot of historical artifacts of the time when this was the center of the German community. And then the capital of Windhoek has a Lutheran church and then a monument to the rider of the mounted cavalry of the German army. That has since been removed by the decision of the government, put in a museum, like many pedestals are empty these days. But this is the capital, the town of Windhoek, and it's the administrative financial center, and you mainly go there when you're on your way out to one of the safari camps or wildlife refuges. And so again, it's kind of prosperous, like you see in Cape Town and many parts of Africa. In the last couple of decades, there's a considerable economic development. There's a growing middle class, communications and air travel. All this is suddenly normal in Africa when, a couple of generations ago, you couldn't go there, you couldn't do that. This is the former German governor's palace, which is now the presidential palace, the Tinten Palace in central Windhoek, and a monument to the Swapo guerrillas who then turned the tide and made the country what it is now. But when you go out of these towns, it suddenly becomes flat, dry, and sort of an endless desert. And there were, again, there were rail lines built across the country to get to Botswana and to get to the east coast of Africa that were mainly for mining. And they closed down, but now there's one that has been reopened as a let's say, a luxury train to go across, at least into Botswana. So that's possible, but the towns are few and far between. This one has the Germany Bergsdorf, so the village of a town, but where'd the town go? Well, a lot of these ranches have been abandoned for lack of water, usually, or people just move away. I mean, a lot of the indigenous native people were nomadic to begin with their cattle, but the remarkable thing about visiting this country is just the geology and the desert life. And there's so many places. I haven't been to many of them, but there's escarpments and deep valleys, suddenly a lush, wet place surrounded by vast desert. These are sort of like those the great steppes in Ireland where the basalt has been cloven by the earth, and so this is where you have many remarkable sights out in the countryside. But most famous are all the sand dunes. The way the wind blows off the sea, or it seasonally comes off the land, has built up the largest sand dunes in the world, except for maybe other places with a lot of sand like the Sahara. But a lot of the country is just sort of empty and so arid that it's remarkable that anybody lives here, especially big, hungry wildlife. But they'll find what they need. Here's a Kensboek's antelope. There are many different kinds of this, but this is the symbol of South Africa. And many of these places is the beautiful various antelopes and their fantastic horns. There are also these areas that are completely salt lakes that again are fed seasonally and then they evaporate, and so like other salt lakes, they're the sort of vast deposit of salt and perhaps lithium and other minerals. And so mining is a very big concern in Namibia because the lithium is so valuable. But a lot of the land is just too rough for anything, except for a few hardy creatures like this Namakwa chameleon and his shadow. But this is the most remarkable thing in the desert, is this unusual plant. Now it's a succulent. There are, what you know at your florist, buy little cacti succulents. They mostly come from the high desert of Namibia. They are able to take moisture out of what little there is in the air. And then this plant lives, it's estimated at over 1,000 years old by carbon dating of the plant. And it's a sort of sprawling mess of a bunch of leaves, and it takes over a little place. And so the life of the plant is actually covered by all this foliage in the desert, and then at every 2 years it then blooms with these odd little flowers. But that just lives like a lost soul out in the middle of the desert, and you can go on excursions to go see them. But you probably don't want to take one home. It may take over your house. Right? Well, anyway, these are the kind of scenes you get when you're going up the coast and inland. Fog banks, mostly coming from the sea. They come in and it doesn't rain. It just sort of moisturizes everything. And then the sea itself is rough and precipitous. Very few harbors. That's why there are only 2 harbors in this 1,000-mile coast. And there again, there's some excursions up into the other bays and wildlife refuges. The Wallace Bay Lagoon is on many of our itinerary, where we'll go get to see dolphins. And I have not heard of any whale watching because that's maybe too far out, or it's not a breeding area. But you can see lots of seals. What they call the marine big 5, which would include mola, the great sunfish, and maybe a whale. But this is the Sand Sea, which is again north of Wallace Bay, and we can't go too far in it because it's so vast. But this is where the wind and the sand coming from inland have met and make this great sculpted piece of desert. And so that, I mean, from above it looks like you're looking at Mars, I suppose, but as you get closer it gets even more interesting. And so that you have, let's say, the traces of nature making a vast sculpture garden. And so this is was a dreaded sight for sailors because that meant there was no water if they were shipwrecked there. But it made for nice postcards and pictures. If you're marooned and stranded there, at least you have scenery, unlike some places. But and I have been marooned a few times. But anyway, here it is with the bay out of north of Wallis Bay, and this fantastic. Maybe only on Mars does it have such qualities. Of course, they don't have the ocean to go with it. But again, it's called a skeleton coast because animals go down there and they can't find fresh water. I mean, elephants go down there to graze in where they can, but if they go too far in the desert, they can't, and there's a sandstorm, they can't make it out. And similarly, there's the skeletons of many ships who, without the modern navigation aids, got lost in a storm and ended up taking their vacation like this. So we are fortunate that we just get to visit the miseries of other peoples who went before us. But so beware which cruise you book. Oh, there's one of my colleagues. I wonder what happened to him. Anyway, it's a remarkable place, but you wouldn't want to spend too much time there. And this is some of the old mining works, which are abandoned in various places. We'll see them. And the fate of a fishing vessel. So, as a sailor, I enjoy looking at pictures of this. I wouldn't want to be responsible, but there's plenty of free parking. So we'll have time in these towns, which you'll see they've kind of grown remarkably. I've been coming here 10, 15 years over and over again, and there's plenty of room to grow, like places like Los Angeles used to have. But now you have the tourism and resort industry coming here. After all that trouble, now we get to come here and have a good time. So partly out of the German investment and the ease of coming here for a holiday, people are coming to Namibia to see all these things I just showed you. And I like this. Your cooperation will help them to be even more courteous. Well, there's a motto to live by somewhere. I wouldn't know where. But anyway, I welcome you to Namibia, and my pleasure to be on the ship with you. And again, I'll be around, be happy to answer your questions and have a meal or drink with you. And I wish you a wonderful trip and a cruise, and welcome to Namibia. Thank you very much.